Hey guys and girls, welcome to this week's review of the X-Files. So this is going to be of season 1, episode 14, and it is called Gender Bender. Quite an out there title, and all will become clear in a moment. So I'm going to try and do these once a week for a while at least, because at the moment things are pretty quiet TV review wise with newer shows, so I'm going to try and get these X-Files reviews out to you at least once a week. Don't hold me to that, people. Don't crucify me if I don't achieve that, but I will aim to do at least one a week, at least for a while, until things get really busy again. So this was an interesting one because I knew the title, Gender Bender, because how are you going to forget a title like that? But I'd completely forgotten anything about the episode, and I think when I watched it, vague things came back to me, like I'm going to get into the plot, but the cult, the religious cult that feature in the episode, I sort of recognised them, the way they look with the black hats and what have you. But apart from that, yeah, I did struggle to remember anything, which probably isn't a good sign. So the setup of the episode is that it opens with a nightclub scene, and it sort of does a swerve on you where this guy is seemingly trying to chat up girls in the club, and it kind of makes it look like he's gonna be like the perpetrator, the one who's potentially gonna attack or go after someone. But then he like goes up to get a drink, and this girl approaches him, and the lead in is that she touches, because at first he doesn't seem into it, which is a bit weird because I'm pretty sure like previously, like a few seconds later, maybe he just fancied getting a drink and wanted to take a break from the kind of casual flirting. But anyway, he said no, not right now or something, and she's like, oh, just one drink or something, or whatever the line is, and she starts touching his like hand mysteriously, like rubbing it, which becomes a thing in the episode. So they go back to I'm assuming her place. They have, I guess, to quote the guy in it, like unbelievable sex. But it turns out she's basically poisoned him, and he ends up dying in bed. And she takes his gender, basically takes his body, and that's where the obviously the title Gender Bender comes from, and it's obviously digging into like themes of like transgender, but putting it in like this sort of sci-fi type context. So that becomes the case for Mulder and Scully to investigate. Mulder points out that there's been similar cases, as quite often is the case in the X-Files. So he points out there's a pattern of this, and they go to the crime scene, and they're told by the reporting detective, who's a real kind of chauvinistic sort of pig, that I'll talk more about that scene in a minute actually. But then there's traces of like some sort of substance on her, and Mulder finds out that this substance can be traced to this town off the beaten track, and they go to this town, and that it's connected to like this religious cult, which I think we're meant to assume are modelled on the on the on the Armage. That's on the Armage. Yeah, quite meant to be quite similar to the Armage. I actually got a little bit of like Traveller vibes about them as well, just because they were riding on horses and carts and what have you. But similar sort of vibe to the Amish, a little bit of had the Traveller type feel, but they are where the suspicion falls about these kill-ins, and Mulder and Scully obviously come up. There's opposition to them from the religious set because, a bit like the Amish, the idea is that they don't they don't live by the same rules as regular society. They consider themselves cut off from other society, and that it's a whole different world. So they don't accept things like the FBI coming in, investigating. They don't accept them having guns because it's, anti-violence or against their sort of religion. And so they kind of plead ignorance to the whole thing, saying, we're sorry about what happened in your world, but we have no idea. It's not part of our world. And so that becomes the investigation. And along the way, there's the UFO sort of plot worked in when we start to see what's actually happening with this religious cult. And there's this whole thing during the episode with Scully and one of them in particular. His name's Andrew, and he's meant to be like the really nervous sort of vulnerable one who potentially Scully could get to open up. But there's also, throughout the episode, we see that the killings are still going on, but then they appear to be happening obviously out of town. So along the way, Scully learns like the full story from Andrew, and that there's a link to his brother who ended up going into town. Now, I guess there's a metaphor here to do with, first of all, obviously date rape, which I guess was quite a fresh thing in the 90s, in the early 90s maybe, but also I think what they're doing is they're linking like the idea of aliens and UFOs to obviously this religious set and the way they talk about other worlds, than regular society is like another world to them, and they live in a separate world. But that's the basics of the episode, and there's a reason I didn't remember much, because it's really bland, this episode. It's totally forgettable in every way. It's, in most ways, one exception maybe, but it's totally forgettable. It's very boring, very sort of dull, and just not a lot of inspiration. Just virtually no thought going into the writing, because you've obviously got potentially meaty themes in here, kind of exploring the issue of date rape, and going into like this idea of religious communities and their sort of objections and comparisons with everyday life. And they could have really gone into that and made these really interesting, grounded, but really, I don't know, really complex characters. Even if ultimately the episode came down on the side of them being like the villains of the piece, they still could have done something with it and still really created this sort of black and white type thing where there's like shades of grey in there. That they really could have done something where these characters, at least some of them, were coming from quite a tragic, humane sort of place, and where maybe they were corrupted into this religion, and or that there's at least a perspective from their point of view that could be, at least you could engage with. But there's just none of that. They're just painted as like cardboard cutout cartoons almost. I think a lot of times a scene with them will go from very little happening to like OTT. In another instance, there's a dinner table scene, for example, with like a ridiculous outburst from one of them. But there's just no thought gone into any of the characters, and they just fluff the main theme, the main premise. They don't explore that in any way. And I have to say, because you've got, I guess in a way, the one that features the most, Andrew, and his stuff with Scully. And he is just, I'm not sure if it's the actor or if it's just that he's not being given anything to do, but he is just extremely boring. I never really believed that he was that vulnerable or that kind of. Then he had this, this dark sort of past with his brother, or then he was that conflicted. But I just never felt that the guy had like no charisma, and there was nothing to the character. It might be more to do with the writing, but the stuff with him and Scully was just sort of weird, because I think you're meant to think, well, is she like using him for information? And there's obviously a bit of this, but quite early on they play up this side of him sort of maybe seducing her potentially. It's this weird thing, because ultimately he's not. It's his brother who's been doing all this stuff. It's not Andrew, but there is this meant to be like this weird sexual tension with him and Scully, and it's just kind of ridiculous. Even if that's what he's trying, they maybe should. I guess what I'm saying is, I think at times in this episode, Scully just seems a little bit naive and a little too taken in by him, because I think she is meant to be like empathizing with him, sort of, but you just think, come on, Scully, be a bit smarter than this. At least be on your guard, sort of thing. And there is this weird sort of scene where he's given her this information, and then because she's saying, well, do you have any proof of this or anything? So he then actually demonstrates on her. He actually uses the stuff, like he rubs like her forearm or her hand, whatever it is. That's another thing about this episode, because that is such a cheap sort of gimmick. It just looks like utterly ridiculous, like these close-ups of them rubbing people's hands, and it's just meant to be somewhere between erotic and sinister, and it's just the music that's playing is just like OTT. It's absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, I don't buy that Scully would be this gullible, this easily taken in. But it's a weird sort of scene, because I don't know. It's like, has he suddenly turned on her? Was he like playing her the whole time? He's obviously given her the truth about his brother and stuff, but it's a bit weak overall, the writing. I don't know exactly where you're supposed to fall on his character, but he does overpower her and tries to like rape her, essentially is the right word. But obviously it's this thing to take her DNA, take her identity, and Mulder, of course, saves the day eventually. But it's it's kind of a creepy and weird sort of scene. But I think definitely Mulder and Scully act out of character in this episode at times. It's not the strongest episode for either. There's a couple of dumb bits of dialogue as well, because at one point, when they go to the crime scene near the start of the episode, and this cop or detective makes this kind of chauvinistic type thing, because he says something like to Scully, because he tells them that they've had like their arteries like sort of like squeezed, essentially, and says must have been one how must have been like some roll in the hay, or something like that. And Scully rolls her eyes, but then Scully comes out with this line that basically says, "It's hard to believe that in this day and age anyone would sleep with someone they don't know." And it's like, really, Scully? Really? In the early 90s, you don't buy that would happen? Come on, give me a break. But there are quite a few bad lines like that. There's a line of dialogue when they get into the town where they start asking like the local shopkeeper about, the whole thing, the case and the religious set. And on the one hand, he kind of says something like they're supposed to be off doing all this voodoo magic. So they're just like random casual stereotypical like shit from him. Although I guess that could just be part of the myth, part of the rumor. But then on the own says, "Oh, I don't have a problem with that. You know, they keep to themselves." So on the one hand, he's kind of damned them with this claim of voodoo magic, and on the other, he's like, "Oh, well, they keep to themselves. You know, whatever." But there's some pretty bad lines, as I said. I think the episode looks really dingy and cheap. It looks just really ugly, but not in a really, inspiring, interesting sort of way. As I said, some hammy lines, some over the top lines. The look of it, for the most part, is bad. Like in the nightclub, it's just the most poorly lit nightclub you'll ever come across. There is one good scene, like in a cave at some point, where Mulder's like investigating and kind of, you know, spying on them, and it's in a cave, and that's where he learns more about the alien plot of the episode. And that visually, that scene works pretty well. I think that works quite well, but generally, the look of the episode, the set design, and the direction is pretty uninspired. And the episode just drags a bit, and there's no real life to it. And it's not really the sort of episode where you can say it has this entertaining vibe to it. Because I've come to think The Jersey Devil might not be a great episode, but there is something that I quite enjoy about that. There is some kind of cheesy badness to that. And it sort of does add to the X-Files mythology anyway. So, yeah, this one is kind of just bad, just boring bad. And they sort of crowbar like this crop circle in at the end. Um, um, and I'll just mention that ending because it's bad for two reasons. And one, because the attempt at a crop circle looks so crap. But the other reason is because of Mulder's final line, which is just so on the nose and lame. Because he ends the episode by saying no earthly means of transportation, because obviously they've escaped. They've been beamed up to the mothership. I think that's another issue of the episode, is that the two halves really don't come together. You know, the alien plot and then the stuff about the kind of date rape stuff. It never really comes together for me. I can see what they were going for, but it just needed more work. The script needed more work. Now, I will say the highlight of the episode, and sadly he's not on screen very long, but we get a cameo from Nicholas Lee. And Nicholas Lee, in case X-Files fans will know, but in case you're watching the show for the first time, Nicholas Lee becomes a much bigger part of the X-Files moving forward, because he reappears in the next season, in season 2, one of the early episodes, and from that point on he has a long running recurring role as Krychek, Agent Krychek, but a different character. So in this he just has a small part, but I guess they liked him so much and his performance that they brought him back in a bigger role next season. And yeah, that's good news for everyone, because he's a really good actor, and Krychek, I should say, is a really good villain. So really, actually, that's kind of a spoiler, but anyway, hopefully you'll forgotten that by the time you get there. But if you're watching it for the first time, but anyway, he's a cool character, really interesting character. But in this, yeah, Nicholas Lee is just given a small role. He plays one of the victims. That's another thing, actually. Now, I'm glad we got to see a bit of Nicholas Lee, but they do have 2 or 3 showing the murder. Like, they cut away from the stuff in this town. to show us like the next victim, and you thought, well, do we really need 3 different victims in this? We've established what happens, what happens to the victims. The drama really should be with Mulder and Scully in the town. We don't. Obviously, I'm glad of this one because of, and this one is actually important because it is what gives them a lead. Because Nicholas Lee plays this character Michael, who becomes the next, or at least the next target, and because he's switching between genders, so he's obviously a woman this time. So he seduces Nicholas Lee's Michael, and they're having sex in a car. A police officer like comes over to car. Obviously, he says, what's going on here?" And that's when we see the change, like when she attacks the police officer, and Nicholas Lee, Michael sees. I keep calling him Nicholas. Michael sees the change before his eyes, and he's basically saved because of the police officer coming up. But he sees, the thing changing back and forth basically. And we just get a little dose of what a good actor this guy is, because his reaction shot at the window, just watching like his shocked expression, is a really brilliant reaction shot. It looks really cool as well because you've got like the sort of condensation at the window as he's watching with this spooked expression. It's really good acting. And then we get another little scene with him in the hospital where Mulder and Scully like question him, and he tells them this story, and it's again a really good scene, a really good bit of acting, and obviously it makes sense. It's a scene that was needed because it gives them the lead. But yeah, he's really good. He has this nervous sort of energy in the hospital, and I think what's good is, on the one hand, when you see him as Krychek later, he's a very different character. Obviously, a lot more fleshed out. But at the same time, there's just little touches that you see from him in this episode that you can then see in Krychek, even though it is a different sort of character. So, just show how versatile he is. So, Nicholas Lee making a small cameo appearance is the highlight of this episode by far. There's 1 or 2 nice shots, but generally it's a real dud of an episode, and I'm not surprised I'd forgotten all about it. So I'm going to give it 3 out of 10. I think because of how boring it is, then I think it has to go nearer the bottom of the list of X-Files episodes so far. So I would say it's not quite as bad as Ghost in the Machine, and it's not quite as bad as Space. I think those are the 2 real turkeys of the season so far, but it's not far off. So I think I'll put it just below those 2. Oh, sorry, just above those 2. So it's third bottom. It's in the relegation zone for people who follow football and would understand that terminology. Bottom 3 with a bullet. That is my review of Gender Bender. And I have to say, unless I'm doing a full rewatch, which obviously I probably would, but unless I'm doing that, I don't see myself watching this one again. I don't see myself rewatching this one outside of doing a proper rewatch. I just don't feel the need to. There's not enough pulling me back. Even in an episode like Ghost in the Machine, I think there are moments. In fact, I might consider putting it below Ghost in the Machine. That was quite a boring episode, but I'm not sure it's as boring as this. I don't know. I'll have a think about it. For now, I think this is just above it, but not by much, as I said. So that's Gender Bender. Let me know your thoughts on the episode in the comments below. If you have a different opinion, please express it. I'll be interested to see. Next time it's Lazarus. That's the next episode, which is quite a Scully-centered episode, and it's been a while since I've seen it, but I remember it being pretty decent, that one. So I'm certainly looking forward to a step back up from this one, which really wouldn't be hard. But as I said, I'm looking to do more of these X-Files, one a week for a while, because I've got quite a light schedule at the moment. Also, other like older shows I'm doing at the moment, classic shows I'm sort of doing. Well, I am doing sort of doing. I'm doing Gilmore Girls, so I'm on season 1 of that. About halfway through season 1, a little bit more. So again, I'll do them more regularly while I'm not as busy, and also Buffy the Vampire Slayer. If you're a fan of that show, I'm sure if you're an X-Files fan, there's a chance you may well be a Buffy fan. So I've just posted the latest review of that, which is Bad Eggs. And look out for more Buffy content, look out for more X-Files content. But next time it will be my review of Lazarus. So thanks for watching, stay safe, see you guys later, goodbye.